The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
I want to get your reaction to the New York Times reporting that President Trump asked the acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, if the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, could unrecuse himself to take control of the Michael Cohen investigation. Does this request, if it's confirmed, rise to the level of obstruction of justice?
I think there's no question that if this reporting is accurate, this is just another data point of an ongoing effort by this president to impede this investigation and to obstruct justice. We should recall that there are 199 criminal charges that have been filed.
Oh, my God.
There have been 37 defendants.
Oh, my God.
There have been 7 convictions and 4 people sentenced to prison. The president has described this as a witch hunt, has tried to undermine the special counsel's investigation, but is now clearly concerned about the Southern District of New York. And to call up the acting attorney general and say, can't you install someone who's favorable to me to this investigation, is completely inappropriate, clearly an effort to impede or undermine the investigation and protect himself, and would constitute obstruction of justice if true.
Yeah, you think? It's been 2 years of outwardly, obstructing justice, like in-your-face obstruction of justice, saying that news reports were fake, saying that this one, needs to be humiliated because he recused himself. That one needs to be humiliated because he's cooperating. People who were nice guys, who we vouch for, all of a sudden are rats, and they're bad, and they're sad, and they're this, and hey, let's attack their whole effing family. Let's go after his father-in-law. Let's go. Of course this has been obstruction in plain sight. There's no question about it. But here's the breaking news for today. We have a new attorney general because we've been through 3 of them now, and Donald Trump keeps shopping for somebody with the same moral compass as himself, which is difficult to find because he doesn't have one. So he's now settled on William Barr, a retread from the Reagan administration. And now today, CNN is reporting that Attorney General Bill Barr is preparing to announce as early as next week that Robert Mueller is done. Now, I don't know if that means Robert Mueller has indicated that he has completed his investigation and Robert Mueller has completed his report, or if it means that Bill Barr is going to make Mueller disappear. All I can tell you is CNN wrote it this way. Attorney General Bill Barr is preparing to announce as early as next week the completion of Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, with plans for Barr to submit to Congress soon after a summary of Mueller's confidential report, according to people familiar with the plans. I don't know if that means Mueller has indicated that he is finished, he is done. I guess, that, he hasn't sentenced Michael Flynn, he hasn't sentenced Rick Gates. There's all these people that are cooperating that haven't been sentenced. I don't know if he's done as far as completed his work, or if he's done because Bill Barr is a man with the same missing moral compass as the President of the United States. We'll just have to wait and see. All I could tell you is that everybody at the Justice Department is preparing to receive Mueller's confidential report. And of course, CNN is couching it in this way. They say the preparations are the clearest indication yet that Mueller is nearly done with his almost 2-year investigation. The precise timing of the announcement is subject to change. TBA, everybody, TBA. Nobody knows what kind of summary Bill Barr is going to send to Congress. Nobody knows if Robert Mueller is actually done. I would say, just from the outside looking in, where is the Gates sentencing memo? Where is the Flynn sentencing? And Flynn seems to be the beginning of everything, okay? And Flynn happened so quickly. You know, the president was barely president. He was sworn in on January 20th, and by January 24th, Sally Yates was already at the White House telling Don McGahn that this man is blackmailable by the Russians, and he really needs to go. And they don't fire him. They let him stay there, receiving national security briefings until the newspaper makes it public, until the reporting is public that Flynn had been intercepted because he's talking to Russians who are routinely surveilled. And to their surprise, Michael Flynn's on the other end of the phone. So I don't know if he's really concluded or if Barr is the right man for Donald Trump, meaning Barr will act as Donald Trump's personal attorney, not the attorney for the United States of America, not the attorney general, not the person who represents the American people on the American dime. No, but instead is going to serve Donald Trump. And in exchange, Barr's kids get these plum jobs in the White House. And over there at FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Unit of the Department of Justice. This is just so strange. I don't know. I can't say. All I could tell you is the way that this article is written is very carefully, and it's not telling me what I need to know. And that is, if Mueller has indicated he is ready to sentence Flynn, he's ready to sentence Gates, he's ready to, close the whole thing. He's made his findings. I have no idea. But I will tell you that this New York Times article yesterday must have put everything on the fast track for Bill Barr. Must have the president's been tweeting like a mofo. And I'll just bet you anything, this article in the New York Times, which is unbelievable because what it shows is that the president for 2 years has been intimidating, humiliating, pressuring, and threatening every single person who's been investigated by Bob Mueller, except for Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump has participated in a pattern and practice of witness tampering, which clearly is obstruction of justice. He asked James Comey to let Flynn go. He only had Sean Spicer make a statement that the president asked Flynn to resign only after, almost 2 weeks had gone by since Sally Flynn went to the White House and said, this man's blackmailable by the Russian government. And the Russians know it because your vice president is repeating his lies. And he had Sean Spicer go out there and say that the reason why this was happening is because, you closed my window. I had Sean Spicer on I had him on a Google window. That's okay. I'll just start with Sally Yates, okay? Let's just go through this Washington Post article, New York Times article. This is amazing. It was 5 reporters, okay? Maggie Haberman is one of them. Mark Mazzetti is another one of them. These are amazing reporters. And what they've shown in this 15-page article that came out late yesterday, that I was able to read prior to the show and play some of the clips that were germane to what they were documenting here in this article. But now, I've had a chance to sit with it and read it again and pull all the clips that are relevant to this article. And so if we go through it, we can show you these moments in time when we heard these clips at first, but we didn't understand. We were just trying to put a puzzle together, and we were only getting little bits and pieces. The first pieces came from Sally Yates. The first pieces came from James Comey. And so all we knew was that the FBI was very alarmed about the incoming Trump administration. And they were alarmed because, we later find out, there were intercepts of these people. There were text messages that were available to the FBI to look at because they were texting Russians, and they're surveilled routinely. And to their surprise, the people on the other end of these emails and on the other, not emails, but on the other end of these phone calls were people involved in the Trump campaign, were people involved in the Trump, now sitting the Trump administration. It's very freaky. And so they opened a counterintelligence investigation. But as soon as James Comey was fired and McCabe became the acting director of the FBI in James Comey's stead, right? Because James Comey was gone. All of a sudden, McCabe says, oh my God, there's been obstruction of justice because James Comey is testifying under oath multiple times and also had contemporaneous notes at the time that Donald Trump was asking him to let Flynn go, to not investigate Flynn. But Comey had already opened up a counterintelligence investigation based on the intercepts. And Sally Yates knew this. And everybody's hair is on fire going, oh my God, we think maybe we have a Russian asset in the White House. And if it's not him, if he's not a Russian asset, surely everybody around him wants something of value from the Russians and are willing to sell out their country to get it. So in Flynn's case, it was sanctions had to be lifted off of Russia so that the Russian money could pour into his nuclear reactor deal that was going to be built in Saudi Arabia without going through any of the usual processes for nuclear transfers. He was just, they had already made their decision, which is what Flynn was saying out loud after he was the national security advisor for real. He was saying the decision's already been made. We're transferring this nuclear. And people were like, what? Whistleblowers inside the White House went and told Congress. So they've known you know how we say Mueller knows everything and we don't know anything? Now we're just finding out about Michael Flynn, which was the very beginning of all this. Now we're finding out that Flynn really was a traitor. And Malcolm Nance nailed it way back then when Flynn was first brought before the judge. And the Flynn charging document was available to all of us. Malcolm Nance said,
actually gave us something we don't see too often, which is someone who has a measured, mature, eloquent way of viewing the case and came up with the sentence, why aren't you in prison, technically? Why aren't we considering treason? This, we live in this political pundit bubble, and we have these two opposing sides who are trying to say what we should and should not think about Michael Flynn. This judge laid it on the line. Michael Flynn betrayed the nation. He literally, for money, sold out the nation. And he was just confused as to why this wasn't treason. And I think he may even have deliberately brought up that word in order to make it clear to everyone listening just how severe the activities that Mike Flynn did and was actually about to get off on. That point.
You see, everybody likes to forget that when the judge was, weighing what to do with Michael Flynn, the judge asked the question out loud, why aren't you in prison? Why isn't this treason? You sold out your country. That was what the judge said in the transcript of the court hearings, right? And everyone forgets that what Michael Flynn did was so severe, but he's not an outlier. Manafort, also. Donald Trump with his Trump Tower, he needed Putin's permission. He wanted something. They all wanted something from the Russian government. They all needed something to happen before they could cash in. These men, the President of the United States, his national security advisor, his campaign manager, his deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates, they all had money as their motivation to betray this nation, this country, and they didn't hesitate to do it. It's not just that they thought about it, well, if Trump wins, it's that when Trump won, they went ahead and betrayed their country, all of them.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
All right, this is fairly deep, okay? This is the former CIA director, John McLaughlin, okay? And he is going to explain to you something very, very deep, okay? why the Saudis want nuclear energy, why the Saudis, this oil-rich kingdom, who killed a Washington Post reporter. Let's not forget Jamal Khashoggi was, I don't know, he had his fingers cut off because he's a writer, and they thought that would be, great punishment for him before they took a bone saw and hacked him into little bits. And the president of the United States decided to side with the Saudis. I mean, this is just so ridiculous. Now, if you want to understand why Flynn, was a traitor to his nation, then you have to listen to the former CIA director, John McLaughlin, explain the nuclear world order and why the Saudis should not have a nuclear weapon and why they want one. And it's because idiot president of ours, our dumbass president who... Listen, all he cares about is himself, and all he cares about is making money. He didn't think he was going to be president, but since he is, why not cash out? Why not become the world's richest man? And so he took us out of an Iranian nuclear deal that Gina Haspel from the CIA says Iran is complying with because the rest of the world is in the Iran nuclear deal. But if you listen to John McLaughlin, the former CIA director, and you listen to Gina Haspel, the current CIA director, then you sort of realize that the Iranians don't have a nuclear weapon, but Trump took us out of the nuclear deal so that he would have an excuse to tell the Saudis or to give the Saudis nuclear because they want it. And in order to justify it, he had to say, well, Iran is outside the nuclear deal. And so Iran, if they're going to get it, then Saudi has the right to it also. This is sick.
The Saudis have made no secret of the fact that they would go for a nuclear weapon if Iran ever got one. Mm-hmm. And by pulling out of the Iran nuclear agreement, the chances of that, the U.S. pulling out, the chances of that, I think, are somewhat greater. The second thing is Saudi Arabia has for some time, as you know, had missiles from China, medium-range missiles that are nuclear capable. They say they would only use them for conventional weapons, but they are configured to carry nuclear weapons if they were available. And when you add what we call the International Regime for Control of Nuclear Weapons, the Non-Proliferation Treaty and so forth, that's, I think, fraying these days when you consider that we've now withdrawn from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty.
With Russia.
I've just come from a trip to Moscow where we discussed the potential for renewing New START. That is also in question, New START, the major arms control treaty that controls major nuclear weapons.
Which expires
in 2021. And the administration has indicated that it's not enthused about renewing it. So against that background, what we have here, if this is all true, and there's a lot to sort out, is the potential for spreading nuclear weapons in a very dangerous part of the world.
So the question here is, when Trump gets caught, and he will, when Trump gets caught, do you think he destroys the world? I mean, the idea that he's taking us out of every single nuclear agreement that has kept us from nuclear war since we realized that it would be mutually assured destruction if anybody launched anything ever. The only time that a nuclear weapon was ever deployed successfully was the first time. And we did it. Okay, we did it twice. Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the only reason why that wasn't a mutually assured destruction pact is because no one else had them. And now other people have them. And all Donald Trump keeps doing is taking us out of the agreements that limit the range, that limit where they can be deployed from, ground missiles, I mean, why is he doing this? Obviously to make money. He wants to sell all this nuclear technology that the United States has to various countries that should never have them because they are not democracies, A. B, they are autocratic oligarchies, petrol states like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, where they kill journalists and they suppress their own people. And if the oligarchs don't kick back to the regime, the 50%, then they're made an example of and they're put in prison. And then cameras are invited in to say, hey, keep your mouth shut because you don't want to end up in that cage. Trump is one of those guys. that was a very scary explanation from John McLaughlin, okay? It just was. Because now, in the context of that conversation, we have to consider what Michael Flynn did. Now, back at the beginning, when Michael Flynn was first, screaming, lock her up, Michael Flynn was engaged in being a traitor to the United States. He was actively engaged in a plan that would actually allow him to commit a treasonous act, an act of war against the United States, in order to enrich himself. And the FBI understood this. They understood it because they had been able to listen into Russian ambassadors and Russian agents' phone calls, and lo and behold, on the other end of the phone call were Trump campaign officials. And so the Russia investigation into the interference in the 2016 election, and the question of whether or not Trump campaign aides were part of it, became obvious to the FBI only 25 days into the Trump administration. It was very clear just, a few days after the president was sworn in. Because a few days, the 24th, he was sworn in on the 20th. On the 24th, Sally Yates goes to tell the White House counsel that they had intercepts. And on the intercepts were Michael Flynn. And that Michael Flynn was talking about selling nuclear technology to the Saudis, built by Russia, but that the sanctions on Russia had to come off, and that the incoming administration, the Trump administration, the election was in November, so November, December, January, they're listening to these conversations. January, Donald Trump is sworn in, and January 24th, Sally Yates says, I don't think you really want to make him the national security advisor. This guy's blackmailable. Why is he blackmailable? Well, we hear the vice president on the TV saying that, there were no contacts, and, that Flynn told him there were no contacts, and that's just patently false, because here are the intercepts. We have them. Why don't you give it a listen? Why don't you hear what your national security advisor is saying on these phone calls that we intercepted because we routinely surveil Russian assets, Russian people in the United States, Russian ambassadors, Russian, you think that if Natalia Veselnitskaya comes here and she's operating at the behest of Yuri Chaika, who's in charge of the Russian, law, their version of the DOJ, that he's not being listened into? That's just crazy. So Sally Yates testifies after she does all these things. She goes to the White House. She tells Don McGahn. Don McGahn takes no action. Flynn is still there. Then all of a sudden, the newspaper gets hold of the Flynn story, and they make it public 2 weeks later, just about. I think it was 18 days. And then Flynn is fired. But they send Sean Spicer out to say the president doesn't trust Michael Flynn anymore because he lied to Pence. That also made the lawyers at the FBI start documenting that the president of the United States was willing to lie to the American people about Michael Flynn's involvement with the Russians because they knew the truth, because they had the intercepts. So here's Sally Yates' testimony.
We began our meeting telling him that there had been press accounts of statements from the vice president and others that related conduct that Mr. Flynn had been involved in that we knew not to be the truth. The first thing we did was to explain to Mr. McGahn that the underlying conduct that General Flynn had engaged in was problematic in and of itself. Secondly, we told him we felt like the vice president and others were entitled to know that the information that they were conveying to the American people wasn't true.
All right, let me stop it there. Now we know what the underlying conduct is. We never knew what the underlying conduct was, but now we do. And the underlying conduct was that Michael Flynn was going to be the national security advisor of the United States with Donald Trump as his commander-in-chief, as his president. And the two of them were willing to take sanctions off of Russia. And that would allow Michael Flynn to cash in with a bunch of generals, no less, Fran Townsend was also part of this group. IP3, they were called. It was a bunch of generals that felt that they had served their nation and now they should be able to get paid. And, Michael Flynn's, thing was always that he was very jealous of guys like Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. But Wesley Clark was also a genius when it came to IT and computers, and he started a logistics company. And Wesley Clark has made a fortune. Okay, he's a very rich man, and there are a lot of generals that have made a lot of money after they served in the military because they started businesses. And Michael Flynn felt that he should be one of those. So Michael Flynn's business was that he was going to get involved with Donald Trump and thereby convince Donald Trump that Putin had the keys to the money kingdom, and that Russia was broke and Putin was desperate, and Putin would give them money in exchange for lifting sanctions, which was making Russia broke, and that the money could go to them if they took the sanctions off. And here's the win-win, Mr. Trump. Not only will you take the sanctions off and you could sell it by saying, why shouldn't we get along with Russia? Because people don't know the answer to that question, and you could just dupe them. But Russia will pour money into you, and we get to build these nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia, and they'll pay for that privilege too. So, and the Saudis, Jared needed Saudi money because Jared was in debt, and Jared needed money for 666 Fifth Avenue, which was, going bankrupt. Trump, wanted Putin's help, and Trump needed Putin's, okay to build a Trump Tower. Michael Flynn wanted to cash in, and so he thought, well, if I build nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia, then with Russian money, it's a win-win for me. I'll get paid twice. So now we know what the underlying behavior was.
And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done.
Of course.
And the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians. And then importantly, that every time this lie was repeated, and the misrepresentations were getting more and more specific as they were coming out, every time that happened, it increased the compromise. And to state the obvious, you don't want your national security advisor compromised with the Russians.
So Sally Yates went to the White House. She told Don McGahn, your national security advisor has been captured on intercepts. His underlying behavior is this. Okay, he is trying to sell nuclear technology to the Saudis, who will buy it. Russian interests will build it, but we need the sanctions to come off Russia so that it frees up money for them and the ability to do international business. Once again, the business that they want to do is with Saudi, and so we need, to do this. Well, the first visit that Trump makes as president of the United States, as you now know, is to Saudi. And nobody understood why, except for the FBI, except for the intelligence community. And they couldn't give us this classified piece of information. So here we were left to try and figure out what exactly Flynn was up to. We knew that whatever Flynn did was treasonous because when he was finally brought to the bar of justice, the judge said, why aren't you in prison? This is treason. So we knew that whatever Flynn did was really bad, but it wasn't bad enough for Donald Trump to fire Michael Flynn. He kept Michael Flynn. And Sally Yates was beside herself because she had already been to the White House and told the White House counsel, who's supposed to be representing us, not the president, but the presidency, right? It's supposed to be representing us, keeping an eye to make sure that the president faithfully executes the laws, that the president upholds the Constitution. I mean, it sounds trite, but that is really what the White House counsel is there for, to protect the integrity of the presidency. And he knew that our national security advisor was an agent for two of our adversaries. Saudi Arabia had attacked us on 9/11. 15 of the 19 hijackers that crashed those planes into the World Trade Center, into the Pentagon, and into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, were Saudis. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi. His parents were very rich Saudis. They owned the Bin Laden construction group. They paved the desert. They paved Saudi Arabia, literally. That's what they did. That's how they made their money. And on September 11th, we flew all the Bin Ladens out of the country because business shall not be disturbed. You talk about the elite, you talk about the swamp. Donald Trump was the handmaid for the swamp. He was laying on a bed while Vladimir Putin held his arms over his head and impregnated him with vermin from the swamp. Donald Trump is a wholly created elitist swamp.
Connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844. Okay, so this was the first crisis, okay? The first crisis that we went through after Trump was chosen as president of the United States and sworn in was the Michael Flynn crisis. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2017, Donald Trump and his advisors were in the Oval Office. I'm reading the New York Times article, by the way, and we're going to play the audio from the relevant times, okay, so that you can, because you've heard all these clips. We've all heard these clips because I have them, and we save them. And we save them so that when all the threads are pulled together and wrapped into a spool, you can go back and listen to them again and understand what was being said, because so much of it was classified and so much of it couldn't be said out loud. So much of it was said in private. So much of it was said behind closed doors. And you know what the sick thing is? Devin Nunes and Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan and Paul Ryan, all these people in the House on the Intelligence Committee and the Speaker of the House, they all knew this. That's the most disgusting part, is they all knew. And they did nothing. In fact, they did something, and that was they investigated the investigators. They denigrated the investigators. They humiliated the investigators. When the investigators were producing actual tape-recorded conversations, they said they're having an affair and they're lovers. Therefore, the tapes are not true. And this was played on an endless loop on the propaganda channel, the faux news, one vowel movement away from what it did to the news. Unbelievable, right? I mean, the tapes are the tapes. But on Valentine's Day, Donald Trump was in the Oval Office with his advisors, and they were debating how do they explain that they have to get rid of Michael Flynn. Now, the only reason why it was February and not January when Sally Yates had warned Don McGahn that Michael Flynn was blackmailable is because they did not care. They didn't, of course, they knew what Michael Flynn was up to because they were doing it too. They were part of it. And by they, I mean Jared. I mean the president. I mean, all of them, Rick Gates and Tom Barrack and everybody around Trump knew what was going on because they were part of what was going on. They all had their different reasons for letting it go on, but they all needed money. They all wanted money. And they were going to change everything in the world to make it even more disgusting than it already is as far as the elite running everything. They felt like the elite always get, and now we are them and we're going to take. And this is what they've been up to. So in February, Flynn was still there, even though Sally Yates had warned them in January. But they let him stay there until it became public, until it was in the newspaper. And when it was in the newspaper that Flynn was subject to blackmail by the Russians and that Flynn was, telling Mike Pence to just go out and lie, then all of a sudden they had to do something about Flynn because it was in the newspaper. And as much as, Donald Trump's going to complain, fake news, they knew it was real because they know what they're doing. They had consciousness of guilt because they were guilty. And so they decided, well, we got to dump Flynn. I don't know what we're going to do. But you know what? I'll say he lost my trust. I'll say that because he lied to my vice president, Mike Pence, which he didn't lie. He just told Mike Pence what to say on the TV. And that was that Mike Flynn had given him assurances that none of this was true. And Mike Pence goes out on the Sunday shows and says, none of this is true. There were no Russian contacts by anybody in the campaign. Michael Flynn told me that that was not true. And of course, the Russians are giggling like schoolgirls going, yep, the whole administration is our bitch. They'll all cover for us. This is good. Then Paul Ryan decides, I don't know how Paul Ryan knew what was going on, but Trump, was talking to Paul Ryan in the Oval Office, and he said, why don't you just say that you asked Flynn to resign because he's lost your trust? Now, Sean Spicer was in that meeting, and Sean Spicer, as the president's press secretary, was just about to brief the news media about the decision on Flynn. And Trump said to Spicer, say that, meaning what Paul Ryan said. Say that. And according to, there's leaks from this meeting. So either this is coming from Paul Ryan or this is coming from Sean Spicer. I don't know who gave this story to Maggie Haberman and who gave this story to Mike Mazzetti, but this is the information they have. And so Trump said to Spicer, say that. And Spicer says, is it true? Is it true that you lost trust in Flynn and that, and he says, just say that I asked for his resignation. And Sean Spicer then leaves the Oval Office and goes to have a press briefing. And this is what he says.
The evolving and eroding level of trust as a result of this situation and a series of other questionable instances is what led the president to ask for General Flynn's resignation.
I guess he did it.
Immediately after the Department of Justice notified the White House counsel of the situation, the White House counsel briefed the president and a small group of his senior advisors. The White House counsel reviewed and determined that there is not an illegal issue, but rather a trust issue. During this process, it's important to note that the president did not have his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, who he trusts immensely, approved by the Senate. When the president heard the information as presented by White House counsel, he instinctively thought that General Flynn did not do anything wrong, and the White House counsel's review corroborated that.
McGann.
It is not ordinary for an incoming national security advisor to speak with his counterparts about the issues of concern to them. In fact, he spoke with over 30 of his counterparts throughout the transition. As Charles Krauthammer said last night, it is, quote, perfectly reasonable for him to do so. The issue here was that the president got to the point where General Flynn's relationship misleading the vice president and others, or the possibility that he had forgotten critical details of this important conversation had created a critical mass and an unsustainable situation. That's why the president decided to ask for his resignation, and he got it.
So check this out. I mean, he invokes Don McGahn, and he says, he confabbed with Don McGahn, and Don McGahn said it's not a legal situation, it's a trust situation. All that's it's false. It's not true. And what was going on during that press briefing that we now know, thanks to Maggie Haberman and Mazzetti and all these reporters on the New York Times, is that when Spicer's briefing began that day after this Oval Office meeting, where Trump just says, go out and say it's a trust thing, it's not a legal thing, and that we ran it through all the legal, and everybody, including the White House counsel, who's supposed to protect the presidency from any law breaking, they all agree there's no legal issue here. The lawyers at DOJ, the lawyers across the intelligence community, the lawyers who knew, the people in the intelligence community and in the Justice Department who knew the truth, were listening to Sean Spicer lie. They heard so many misstatements there, and their concern was that Sean Spicer was saying that Flynn had been exhaustively investigated and that they had run it through to Don McGahn, and that they said this was patently, provably untrue because Sally Yates had already been to the White House and told Don McGahn 3 weeks earlier that Flynn was intercepted talking to the Russians and he's blackmailable because the Russians know what he said. And they now know the vice president is repeating these lies. And they now know you are repeating these lies. Then Sean Spicer goes out and repeats these lies. And so Spicer tells the New York Times that he stuck to talking points that he was given by the White House counsel's office, and that White House lawyers expressed concern only about how he had described the thoroughness of the internal inquiry into Flynn. But the lawyers over at FBI, they wrote a memo. They were sitting there watching this. And they wrote a much longer memo, and they said, here are all the misstatements that Sean Spicer just said. They sent it to the White House. They said, his press briefing today was full of lies. And the White House never, ever publicly corrected the record. The White House never said, okay, we'll correct the record. And so we were left with this impression that the reason why Flynn was fired is because the president lost trust in him because he had lied to the vice president. When Sally Yates testified that she had told Don McGahn to the Senate understood what the lay of the land was. You know why? Because they'd already been briefed.
Ms. Yates, we've established in the course of these questions that on December 27th and 29th, former National Security Advisor General Flynn discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador. So when the Trump transition team told the Washington Post on January 13th that sanctions were not discussed, was that false?
I understand that there have been news reports to that account, but I can't confirm whether, in fact, those conversations regarding sanctions occurred, because that would require me to reveal classified information.
Well, now we know.
Understood. So I have a whole series of questions about things that would have been untrue. Were that the case, you're not going to be able to answer any of those.
Not to the extent that it goes to General Flynn's underlying conduct. I can't address that.
Well, then let me move to that, if I might.
Sure.
On January 24th, you just testified that National Security Advisor Flynn was interviewed by the FBI about his underlying conduct, and that underlying conduct was problematic because it led to the conclusion the vice president was relying on falsehoods. What was that underlying conduct, and are you convinced that the former National Security Advisor was truthful in his testimony to the FBI on January 24?
Again, I hate to frustrate you again, but I think we're going to have to, because my knowledge of his underlying conduct is based on classified information, and so I can't reveal what that underlying conduct is. It's why I had to do sort of an artificial description here of events without revealing that conduct.
I understand that. On January 27th, you just testified that you discussed with White House Counsel McGahn 4 different topics, and one of them included the possibility of criminal prosecution of the former National Security Advisor, and what would the applicable statutes be. What applicable statutes did you discuss? And in your conclusion, should the National Security Advisor face criminal prosecution?
Senator Coons, I'm going to strike out here, because if I identify the statute, then that would be insight into what the conduct was. And look, I'm not trying to be hyper-technical here. I'm trying to be really careful that I observe my responsibilities to protect classified information. And so I can't identify the statute.
Okay. Do you believe the administration took your warnings seriously when you made this extraordinary effort to go to the White House and in-person brief the White House counsel on the 26th and 27th? Do you think they took appropriate steps with regards to General Flynn as the National Security Advisor, given that he remained a frequent participant in very high-level national security matters for 2 weeks?
Well, certainly in the course of the meetings, both on the 26th and 27th, Mr. McGahn certainly demonstrated that he understood that this was serious. So he did seem to be taking it seriously. I don't have any way of knowing what, if anything, they did. If nothing was done, then certainly that would be concerning.
So you don't know whether they took any steps to restrict his access to classified information, to investigate him further, up and until the Washington Post published information that made it clear that he had been lying to the vice president?
No, again, I was gone after the 30th, and so I wouldn't know if any steps had been communicated to the Department of Justice, but I was not aware of any, no.
Had you not been summarily fired, would you have recommended to the White House counsel that they begin further investigations into the National Security Advisor, or that they restrict his access to sensitive and classified information? Well,
it's a bit of a hypothetical. Had I remained at the Department of Justice, and if I were under the impression that nothing had been done, then yes, I would have raised it again with the White House.
So she's fired. The woman who warned the president of the United States that his national security advisor was blackmailable by the Russians can't tell us back when she's testifying what the underlying behavior is, which now we know was a transfer of nuclear technology to the Saudis via Russia, okay? That Russia was going to build these things and America was going to take the sanctions off Russia to free up their ability to do this kind of business in Saudi Arabia. That's the underlying behavior. That the White House kept him there, knowing. Don McGahn knew, because she told him. She told him twice. She told him on the 27th. She went back to the White House on the 29th, and he doesn't get fired until it hits the newspapers, and they have no choice. They send Sean Spicer out to lie about the reason why he was fired, and later that same day, that they're in the Oval Office telling Sean Spicer to go to the briefing and to lie to the American people about the reason Michael Flynn has been fired. And it's only after it's in the newspaper that they do something, even though they've allowed him, we think that they've allowed him to continue to take classified intelligence briefings for 2 more weeks. See, that's a question for Don McGahn. Did you allow him? And that's why Don McGahn has testified, but in private. We don't know what Don McGahn was asked or answered. But later that same day, that's when Donald Trump calls James Comey into the Oval Office and asks him to let Flynn go. That day, all this happened in one single day. Valentine's Day, 2017. It's unbelievable. So, late January, Sally Flynn's warning them. He's blackmailable. They're like, yeah, we know, because we are too. We are too. They send Spicer out to tell the American people a lie that Flynn was let go because he lied to Pence. That's bullcrap. He told Pence what to say on the TV. That's what happened. And then later that day, after he says that he asked Flynn to resign, he calls Comey in and says, let him go. Let him go.
Donate.
Mary had a little man. The fault.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
All right, let me just continue, okay? This is the timeline. So we have Donald Trump being sworn in as president on January 20th. By the 24th, everybody at the FBI has their hair on fire because they have Michael Flynn on an intercepted bunch of phone calls talking to Russians, making deals about sanctions and texting at the inaugural saying the sanctions are going to come off and isn't this going to be great? And they know that his deal is to get the sanctions off Russia so that Russia can now engage in the transfer of nuclear technology to the Saudis with an American assist. And that Trump's going to pull us out of the Iran deal and that Trump is going to create some environment that says, oh, Iran's now going to have a nuclear weapon, therefore Saudi is within their rights to pursue nuclear capability. I mean, this is very sick what's going on, but that's what's going on. And people in the intelligence community, they know that Russia has hacked. They know that Russia has interfered in the election. They are already aware of trolls and bots and voter suppression efforts and the hacking into state voter registration rolls, the whole 9 yards. I mean, our intelligence community, our FBI counterintelligence investigators, they already know this. Now they're in the office. Sally Yates is sent to brief them about somebody who's very obviously involved because he's caught dead to rights on a tape. And Don McGahn is told, and Don McGahn, I don't know what he does. That's a question for Don McGahn that he has been asked and answered in private. We don't know. We'll find out. But Don McGahn was warned about Michael Flynn. Whether or not he allowed Michael Flynn to continue to get classified, super classified presidential daily briefings and information like that, we know he allowed Jared to do it because Jared then provides the enemies of the Saudi royal family on a silver platter so that the Saudi royal family knows who to kidnap, who to put in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, who to threaten, and who to kill. And they do it. And they do it. So we know that the Trump administration is literally trying to enrich their own damn selves with dirty money from dirty countries who we would never give nuclear technology to. We would never take sanctions off of because they had just recently intruded into our democratic election. The day that all this comes to a head is Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2017. Paul Ryan is in the Oval Office, and Paul Ryan says to Donald Trump, why don't you just go, go, now that the newspaper, look at the Washington Post. Oh, my God, there's a story that Flynn has committed, treason. Flynn is a traitor. That's what it says here in the Washington Post. What are we going to do, Mr. President? What are we going to do? And the president says, I know just what to say. I'm going to tell the American people it's all a hoax. This Russia investigation is all a hoax. And I'm going to contain the investigation on the other side of it. So, yeah, we're going to have to get rid of Flynn. Don't worry. I'll ask Comey for a loyalty pledge, and I'll make sure that when Flynn leaves, he's protected by our FBI. And that's exactly what happens. They send Spicer out to tell you a lie about why Flynn was let go. And that same day, they call Donald Trump has Comey into the Oval Office, and he tells Donald Trump, Sean Spicer did a great job explaining how the White House handled Michael Flynn's firing. And then he says to Comey, Michael Flynn is a good guy. And Comey says, according to the memo he wrote at the time, that day he wrote a memo, that Flynn was a good guy, but he said nothing about ending the FBI investigation. That's February. In March, Jeff Sessions, who's no idiot and has friends in the Senate, is probably told they're on to you too. They're on to you. Now, Sessions lies through his confirmation hearing to Al Franken, and he says, all Al Franken asked Jeff Sessions was, what would you do if you found out that there were Russian operatives inside the White House? I mean, what would you do? And Jeff Sessions famously says, I've been called a surrogate a time or two, and I can tell you there's been no contacts with Russians. That turned out to be a lie. And Jeff Sessions then recuses himself in March because he's had contacts with Russians in his private Senate office, not at the NRA meetings, not in, public town halls or whatever. No, in his office, and everybody knows it. And so Jeff Sessions is left with no choice but to recuse himself. And Donald Trump is frustrated with this decision, and so he starts to publicly humiliate Jeff Sessions, which nobody objects to because Beauregard is a racist. And his primary concern as Attorney General was going to be going after drugs and deporting 11 million people. So nobody cared that Trump was frustrated with Sessions. They thought, you deserve it. It's Beauregard. What did you think? That's March. By May, Donald Trump is frustrated with James Comey as well and fires James Comey, which then proves to the FBI that there's been an active obstruction of justice. It's not a coincidence that Spicer's lying about Flynn. It's not a coincidence that they didn't fire Flynn when they were notified that Flynn was blackmailable. It's not a coincidence that Flynn is only let go after the Washington Post publishes the story about Flynn and intercepted messages. It's not a coincidence that same day Comey is asked in the Oval Office to remain, and even Beauregard is asked to leave, and he asks Comey to let Flynn go. Subsequently, there are hearings, and we listened to Comey's testimony, but we weren't able to understand the full story. Now we can. So here's Dianne Feinstein asking James Comey, why do you think you were fired?
Why do you believe you were fired?
Guess I don't know for sure. I believe I think the president had his word that I was fired because of the Russia investigation. Something about the way I was conducting it, the president felt created pressure on him that he wanted to relieve. Again, I didn't know that at the time, but I've watched his interview. I've read the press accounts of his conversations, so I take him at his word there. Now, look, I could be wrong. Maybe he's saying something that's not true, but I take him at his word, at least based on what I know now.
talk for a moment about his request that you pledge loyalty and your response to that and what impact you believe that had.
I don't know for sure because I don't know the president well enough to read him well. I think it was, first of all, our relationship didn't get off to a great start, given the conversation I had to have on January 6th. This was not, this didn't improve the relationship.
Let me just interject here. January 6th was the day that Comey had to brief the president that there was information around that said that he had had a pee-pee party in Russia at the Ritz-Carlton and that it was caught on tape. Now, he didn't say he believed it or didn't believe it. He just had to tell the president that there was information out there that said that he had been caught on camera hiring Russian prostitutes and having them to the hotel room where Barack and Michelle Obama had previously slept in order to soil the bed. That's what James Comey had to do when he first met the president. Tell him that that existed in the world.
Because it was very, very awkward. He was asking for something and I was refusing to give it. But again, I don't know him well enough to know how he reacted to that exactly.
Do you believe the Russia investigation played a role?
And why I was fired?
Yes.
Yes, because I've seen the president say so.
Let's go to the Flynn issue. Senator Risch outlined I hope you could see your way to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. But you also said in your written remarks, and I quote, that you had understood the president to be requesting that we drop any investigation of Flynn in connection with false statements about his conversations with the Russian ambassador in December, end quote. Please go into that with more detail.
Well, the context and the president's words are what led me to that conclusion. As I said in my statement, I could be wrong, but Flynn had been forced to resign the day before. And the controversy around General Flynn at that point in time was centered on whether he had lied to the vice president about the nature of his conversations with the Russians, whether he had been candid with others in the course of that. And so that happens on the day before. On the 14th, the president makes specific reference to that. And so that's why I understood him to be saying that what he wanted me to do was drop any investigation connected to Flynn's account of his conversations with the Russians.
This is all Valentine's Day. This all happens on Valentine's Day of 2017. Now, because Sessions had recused himself and he fired Comey, all of a sudden, the president has Sergei Kislyak and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian ambassador and like the Russian Secretary of State in the Oval Office and brags to them that he fired that nutbag Comey. Next day, this is February 15th. He has them in the Oval Office with no American president and present and says to them, I fired that nutbag Comey. This Russia thing is over. This Russia thing is over. And then privately, Trump tries to get rid of Jeff Sessions. That's when he started running around going, where's my Roy Cohn? Roy Cohn, the mafia attorney, Roy Cohn, the twisted freak of a man who was such a dirty lawyer that he got disbarred before he died of AIDS, closeted homosexual, a devious. I mean, he was Joe McCarthy's attorney for the Red Scare hearings and Donald Trump's attorney back in the day. And Trump felt betrayed by Jeff Sessions because Jeff Sessions also got caught and had to recuse himself. And so he tries to fire Jeff Sessions privately. He says, where's my Roy Cohn? And the people working in the White House like Don McGahn, they refuse. They refuse to fire Jeff Sessions because they understand that would be after the firing of Comey and after letting Flynn go, only after it's in the newspaper, they understand that it's starting to look, smell, feel like obstruction. And that if Don McGahn or anybody in the White House fires Jeff Sessions, then they will also be implicated in the obstruction. And so Don McGahn refuses to fire Jeff Sessions and says he would rather quit. So the president of the United States calls up this punk-ass guy, Corey Lewandowski. He calls him up on the 4th of July. It's... How patriotic. He calls him up on the 4th of July weekend and he asks him, call Jeff Sessions, pressure him to quit. Tell him, I don't want him here. I'll humiliate him. I'll embarrass him. I'll threaten him. And he does. But Corey Lewandowski also is smart enough to understand he'd be implicated in obstruction if he did it, so he doesn't do it. He can't get anybody to fire Jeff Sessions. By this time, Mueller has been appointed by the acting Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, because Jeff Sessions is recused. And McCabe, who takes over as acting at FBI, tells Rod about all the evidence they have that this is a very dirty administration. We need a special counsel. 8 days later, Mueller is appointed. Now Trump's trying to fire Mueller.
Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
I know you and other members of your team briefed the so-called Gang of Eight. These are the leaders of Congress in the days after Comey was fired about the Russia investigation. So it would have been the Majority Leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and Democratic counterparts. Did you tell them that you had opened a counterintelligence investigation into President Trump?
The purpose of the briefing was to let our congressional leadership know exactly what we'd been doing. Opening a case of this nature, not something that an FBI director, not something that an acting FBI director would do by yourself, right? This was a recommendation that came to me from my team. I reviewed it with our lawyers. I discussed it at length with the Deputy Attorney General, and I told Congress what we had done.
Did anyone object?
That's the important part here, Savannah. No one objected. Not on legal grounds, not on constitutional grounds, and not based on the facts.
So what you have here is a Senate and a House, Paul Ryan, obviously, in that meeting with Donald Trump saying, why don't you just tell the people of the United States through your press secretary that, you know, you lost trust in Flynn. I mean, they all knew. They knew what happened with Flynn. They knew that there were intercepted phone calls. They knew that Donald Trump was plotting and planning and scheming. They knew that Donald Trump was compromised, and they didn't care because they're the elites, and that's what they do. They protect their own, turf. They protect their own money. They protect their own interests, and the hell with us, and the hell with democracy, and the hell with... And that's why Paul Ryan didn't run again. I mean, here you have a guy who's Speaker of the freaking House, and he doesn't run again. You have a lot of that going on. You have a lot of people that just said, like Jeff Flake, he was, they all knew. They all knew. And the way that they questioned James Comey, well, you weren't ordered to do anything, so screw you. I mean, it was disgusting. This is a Republican from Idaho. This is Senator Risch.
I hope you can let this go. Now, those are his exact words. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you wrote them here and you put them in quotes?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for that. He did not direct you to let it go.
Oh, bite me.
Not in his words, no.
He did not order you to let it go.
Again, those words are not an order.
No. He said, I hope. Now, like me, you probably did hundreds of cases, maybe thousands of cases, charging people with criminal offenses. And of course, you have knowledge of the thousands of cases out there that where people have been charged. Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
Oh, my God.
I don't know well enough to answer. And the reason I keep saying his words is I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the President of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
Listen, here are the correct words, okay? James Risch, Republican of Idaho, is a piece of duty, okay? Just want to say that. Because this was always about obstruction of justice, and it started with the first crisis of Michael Flynn, and then it progressed into the crisis of Jeff Sessions recusing himself, and then it progressed into the obstruction with the firing of James Comey. McCabe opens up a obstruction case against the president because he sees all of this, and what the president was driving at in this meeting with James Comey after he asked James Comey to let Flynn go the same day that he said, oh, it's in the newspaper. Sorry, Michael, got to let you go. We're just going to tell people that, you lied. There's no criminal thing here. We'll make it clear in the press briefing. We'll lie. Don't worry about it. We'll lie. And then he tells James Comey, I need you to adopt my position. I need you to play ball. I need you to be a loyalist to me and me alone, Donald J. Trump. And Comey is sitting there saying, OF. And he won't do it. And the president tells him this in February. March, Sessions recuses, get Rod Rosenstein in there. Then in May, fires Comey, and McCabe becomes the new Comey. McCabe is having none of it. He goes and talks to Rosenstein. Now Trump has to have a different strategy because Mueller's been appointed because of McCabe and Rosenstein agreeing this doesn't look good. Something's really stinking wrong here. Hey, listen to these intercepts. Listen to these conversations. You're telling me the entire intelligence community has intercepted phone calls between 110 contacts with Russia and people on the Trump campaign. This is the stuff they know that we don't know. So then there's a new strategy that comes from the House of Representatives. The freedom crackers get involved. Paul Ryan and Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and Mark Meadows and one Devin Nunes. They all get involved. And they decide the strategy should be to investigate the investigators, to smear everyone who ever worked at DOJ, everyone who ever worked at the intelligence agencies, anybody who ever worked in law enforcement, regardless of, how many years they've had it. I mean, McCabe was denied his pension the day of his 50th birthday when he had earned it. That day. They were sending messages, strongly. Back off. I'll rip you off. I'll take away the little pension you got going for you. And so Gaetz and Mark Meadows and Devin Nunes, they decide that they would investigate the investigators and that they would talk to Fox News and they would tell Fox News the real problem is Hillary. The real problem is Hillary. It's always been Hillary. Hillary this, Hillary that. And so they write a letter, Gaetz and Jordan draft a letter to Jeff Sessions and Rosenstein. And they start asking for the appointment of a second special counsel to investigate Mueller, to investigate James Comey, to investigate McCabe, to investigate. And only 20 GOP House members sign on to it. Only 20. But it's enough. And they start to investigate the investigators and the DOJ. The Department of Justice, Jeff Sessions, gives the freedom crackers the text messages between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. The DOJ has these text messages, and they give them to the freedom crackers. And they start saying that Lisa Page and Strzok were covering for Hillary's Uranium One deal, which has been completely and utterly debunked because it takes 9 signatures, one of them being the Secretary of State, in order to do a transfer of any materials used in nuclear. And what's so strange is that Flynn is trying to transfer the whole kit and caboodle to the Saudis. But they go after Hillary. And Fox News starts repeating this Hillary thing. And they still do it. They were doing it last night. I mean, I just couldn't believe they will. They're like a dog with a freaking a bone with a shred of meat left on it, and they just won't stop.
Well, the one thing about the fact that he has revealed that apparently there were these chats between him and Rod Rosenstein and others regarding using the 25th Amendment to get rid of the president of the United States. You would think that the administration would love that because it continues the narrative that is out there that there's a deep state out there at the highest reaches of government that are working against the president. And then when you see Andy McCabe on television saying, yeah, I had this conversation, we're trying to figure out how to do it, the president and his team say, see? That's exactly what we've been talking about for the last 2 years. There is a deep state, and he is proving it.
He has not had a good answer to the question of why his wife got $680,000 from the Hillary Clinton campaign. They never met, was his answer. For a state Senate race, it's pretty substantial. We also don't know why $140 million goes to the Clinton Foundation, but Hillary Clinton had from Russia, but Hillary Clinton didn't raise up any eyebrows without any of her possibly being compromised by that country. Yeah. And we also don't know about an investigation that happened July 5th, where Hillary Clinton was questioned, but not under oath, with nobody taping it at all. But she doesn't, no one ever asked these questions to him. And the dossier, which was the foundation of all of it, barely comes up in any of this cross-examination.
It's because the dossier had nothing to do with anything. I mean, it really had nothing to do with anything. But they're never going to stop. They're never going to stop. Last night, this is what Hannity's, I mean, they're being confronted with real investigative information that results in indictments, that results in sentencing memos, that results in filings, that results in Flynn going before a judge, and the judge, what was his name, Ellison or something, said, why aren't you in jail? You just committed treason. I don't understand why you're not in jail. And he's not in jail because he entered into a plea agreement to cooperate with Mueller. Okay? This is all, and last night, their last chance at covering this up is Bill Barr, the third attorney general. I mean, they went after Rod Rosenstein. They tried, Nunes tried to hold Rosenstein in contempt of Congress. He said that he would impeach Rod Rosenstein if documents he wanted weren't turned over to Congress. And of course, they weren't going to turn it over to Congress because they knew that Nunes and Jordan and all the freaks and Meadows in the Freedom Crackers caucus were giving all the information to the Trump administration. And that it was, that as soon as DOJ handed over the text between Lisa Page and Strzok and started to investigate the investigators and denigrate them and smear them and say because they had an affair, nothing they said was true. I don't even understand how you get there, but this is what they did. And now their last chance at killing this investigation, the very last chance, is a new attorney general named Bill Barr. And this new attorney general, Bill Barr, has to suppress the results of the Mueller investigation because the president can't fire Mueller. He's tried. Don McGahn said he'd rather quit, and he did. Jeff Sessions wouldn't do it. Corey Lewandowski wouldn't do it. Nobody will do it because they know that there's obstruction in the White House because they know what they were doing. And so Hannity is going to go down in a great big ball of flame, just like Bill O'Reilly did after he was caught molesting countless women.
Let me go to what we have here.
Yeah, let's.
And everybody that I know that knows William Barr says straight arrow. William Barr is going to do his job. If he does his job, Sarah, he has to go back to Hillary. He has to go back to a rigged investigation.
This is last night.
He has to go back to the crime she committed. He has to go to the FISA that everybody was warned about, the dossier. What lies were told the FISA judges, correct?
Correct. And Sean, there is nobody else to actually have an investigation conducted on any of this but William Barr. Remember, the final say is going to be the Department of Justice. Congress can only do so much. But without the Department of Justice actually opening up an investigation, without William Barr, all of this goes nowhere. We absolutely have to have an investigation.
So, John, you're going to blow this story wide open tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Both of you, and I'll ask John first, do you believe now that things are closing in on those deep state people that tried to rig a presidential election and undo a duly elected president breaking the law and doing nefarious things and illegal things? John.
I do believe that the truth is finally coming about how a small group of people at the top of the Justice and FBI, Department of Justice and FBI tried to undo what the American voters did and do it in ways that were in violation of the laws and regulations they were supposed to adhere to.
Last word, Sarah.
Sean, What we're seeing was a silent coup, and if the Department of Justice doesn't open an investigation into this, then it will be a disservice to the American people.
No, it's even worse than that. It will be a shredding of the Constitution and the end of the rule of law as we know it, and due process and equal justice and application of our laws. I hope the new Attorney General understands how significant and serious this all is. Go back to the beginning.
The beginning is Michael Flynn. The beginning is not Hillary Clinton in 2015. The beginning is not Hillary Clinton and, Uranium One, where she was one of 9 different, parts of the government that had to sign off on the sale of a Canadian company to Russia. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. It makes no sense. But they're going to continue to say that Mueller is dirty, that Sessions, recused himself as, some sort of deep state plot, that McGahn was dirty because he wouldn't fire Mueller, that, Whitaker's got to go because he won't take a bullet for the president. Listen, the guy that Whitaker was told, Whitaker became the acting attorney general. This is why we're on number 3, Bill Barr. Now, they tried the intermediary. They tried the Whitaker. Whitaker says to the New York Times in this article that he believed he was selected to take a bullet for the president. He believed that he was selected so that he could fall on a grenade as the president's personal attorney, not as the Attorney General of the United States, our attorney. But he believed his job was to serve as the president's personal attorney. And the thing that happened is that when Preet Bharara exposed the Prevezon case, going back to the beginning, okay? The beginning, obviously, is, that Vladimir Putin stole $230 million from the Russian treasury from a guy named Bill Browder and laundered it through New York real estate. And Preet Bharara, who was the U.S. attorney in New York, was working that case and got that case into court. And that case was just about to produce a guilty verdict. And the president of the United States fired Preet Bharara. The replacement for Preet Bharara came much later. It's a guy whose name is Jeffrey Berman. You probably heard Jeffrey Berman's name being thrown around in the media last night. Jeffrey Berman was the guy that was supposed to run interference for Trump. Jeffrey Berman, he's a Trump loyalist. Trump put him into the SDNY to kill the investigation, and Jeffrey Berman won't do it. You know who Jeffrey Berman worked with very closely at the organization known as Greenberg Traurig, the giant lobby shop that I have a little knowledge of? Jeffrey Berman worked with Rudy Giuliani at Greenberg Traurig. Jeffrey Berman was a managing partner at Greenberg at the same time Rudy Giuliani was at Greenberg. Rudy Giuliani's been let go from Greenberg. And Jeffrey Berman was picked by Giuliani to go to SDNY and be the U.S. attorney in New York. Well, Jeffrey Berman has a conflict of interest, obviously, and in New York, they run you through the conflict test, and Jeffrey Berman failed it, so he had to recuse himself. Whitaker was told, call Jeffrey Berman and ask him to unrecuse himself. But the way that SDNY works, Jeffrey Berman couldn't recuse himself. He was found to have had a conflict of interest with the Trump administration because he gave money, lots of money, and raised money for Donald Trump's presidential campaign. So he can't be in charge of any investigation where Donald Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator. And in the Michael Cohen case, Donald Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator, so he can't unrecuse himself.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
It's not surprising at all, right? Especially when you're familiar with the history that we went through in May of 2017. It's not that different from asking Director Comey to just let go of the investigation of Mike Flynn. Of course, one of the crucial steps that caused us to believe that this president might, in fact, be trying to obstruct justice. So it's not surprising the reporting in the Times today, but it is incredibly alarming, and it's something that the people in this country should be focused on, should be asking questions about.
Yeah, I think he's right. I think it's something very alarming, and I think it's something that we should be asking questions about. And last night, McCabe is obviously on a book tour, and he is appearing on all the networks. He did 60 Minutes first, and then, last night he was on CNN, and he was on MSNBC. And on CNN, Wolf Blitzer simply asked him, do you think the president is a Russian asset?
The fact is, I, like all the men and women in the FBI, people across government and the military, I did my job. I stood up to the obligations of my office. When we're presented with facts, we made hard decisions that we knew would be tough on the organization, would be tough on us personally. Look what I've gone through as a result of those decisions. But we did them anyway because we were committed to our responsibilities and serving this country.
Do you still believe the president could be a Russian asset?
I think it's possible. I think that's why we started our investigation, and I'm really anxious to see where Director Mueller concludes that.
Back at the beginning, when Donald Trump first took office, and before we actually had a swearing in, an inaugural, we had a senator named Harry Reid who had been there forever from, I want to say, Nevada, right? Harry Reid was a majority leader. He was a minority leader, blah, blah, blah. And he suggested that Donald Trump was so disloyal to his country and so untrustworthy and so unworthy of the presidency that we don't give him intelligence briefings.
Give him fake briefings.
What does that even mean?
It means they'll tell him stuff. He won't know the difference.
And here we are. And Rudy Giuliani handpicks the SDNY prosecutor, who then has to be subject to a conflict investigation. They find out that Jeffrey Berman has a gigantic conflict of interest. He has to recuse himself from everything Trump. And so Trump picks poorly again because he doesn't understand the world in which he lives. He doesn't understand how our system of laws, how our system of checks and balances, how our system of government works. He has no regard for it. He has no knowledge of it. He doesn't care about it. He won't, learn it. And so he picks a guy who is forced to recuse himself. And Whitaker is then hired because Donald Trump sees Matt Whitaker on CNN. He sees him on the television set. Matt Whitaker was an analyst for CNN, and Matt Whitaker suggested that the way out of the Mueller investigation was simply to defund Bob Mueller's investigation. Just, don't pay him. Just don't appropriate the money for it. And Trump says, get me that guy, and he hires Matt Whitaker. And he says to Matt Whitaker, I want you to call Jeff Berman at SDNY, and I want you to kill this Michael Cohen investigation. I want you to stop it. I want you to, just kill it, end it, because I am part of that. And Whitaker says he'll take the grenade, and he accepts his mission, and he fails because he doesn't understand the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. He doesn't understand the rules, the law, the conflict investigation. He doesn't understand that it's not up to Jeffrey Berman about whether or not he should unrecuse himself. He's been found to be conflicted, and he has recused himself in order to keep the job of U.S. Attorney in New York. And so Matt Whitaker decides that he will parse his words. And he will say, at no time did the White House ask for a promise or a commitment that I could get Jeffrey Berman to recuse. That's not saying they didn't ask you to call him and find out what his options are.
At no time has the White House asked for, nor have I provided, any promises or commitments concerning the special counsel's investigation or any other investigation. Since becoming acting Attorney General, I have run the Department of Justice with fidelity to the law and to the Constitution.
So now he's fired. because he couldn't accomplish the unrecusing of Jeffrey Berman, the Rudy Giuliani hand-picked prosecutor, to go to SDNY. Now, Giuliani himself, he was giving all the information that he could get through this joint defense agreement from Manafort's attorney, Kevin Downing, and he was giving it to Donald Trump the whole time. And Downing shared details about the prosecutor's lines of questioning, and Giuliani was then... Giuliani admitted that late last year that, he was getting information from Manafort's attorney and giving it to Donald Trump. And it's because Donald Trump is dangling pardons. This is another way he's obstructing. He's dangled pardons for Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn. But unfortunately for him, in April, the FBI decided to go through and raid Michael Cohen's office, and Cohen pled guilty. Cohen pled guilty and said that he made those payments to those women at the direction of Donald Trump. And so, according to his allocution, meaning his words under oath to the court as he's pleading guilty, he makes Donald Trump an unindicted co-conspirator.
What is the legal jeopardy here for the president? The words pattern of obstruction, corrupt intent, why do they matter here?
Well, you really hit the nail on the head there, John. The question in any obstruction case is what is the president's intent and whether he's doing it for some innocent reason. Did he want Berman in because he thought he was a better lawyer than Robert Khuzami, who's been serving as the first assistant there on the case? Or did he want him in because he wanted someone who would protect him? We remember how he tried to get Jeff Sessions, the former attorney general, to sort of unrecuse, leaning on him in that way. And so the question all along in these cases is, what is the president's intent? Is it a corrupt intent used to try to protect himself where he thinks he has real exposure? And in the Cohen case, it is clearly one where he has been already implicated as an unindicted co-conspirator in those hush money payments in coordination with Michael Cohen, his former lawyer.
So we have a president of the United States who we know is an unindicted co-conspirator already and has been ever since Michael Cohen pled guilty and gave his allocution to the judge and said that he did these illegal things at the direction of Donald Trump, the president of the United States. That right there is impeachable, okay? And the president then switched his feelings about Cohen being a wonderful guy and, oh my God, early in the morning, they banged on his door, they did these terrible things, and isn't this horrible? And now he savages Michael Cohen and Michael Cohen's whole effing family. Go after his father-in-law. His father-in-law engaged in criminal activity, and Michael Cohen is a rat, and he comes from a whole family of rats. And, this is witness intimidation. This is witness tampering. That's also a form of obstruction. And so today, when the news broke that Bill Barr, the newly installed, the last line of defense, okay? When the news broke today that Bill Barr is going to announce that Mueller is done as early as next week, you have to wonder if Mueller is really done or if Bill Barr is saying that Mueller is done. The last freaking line of defense.
Of course, it's very hard to keep all of this in your head. How many times we've seen this pattern? But the New York Times lays it all out. So it's not just that he leaned on Matt Whitaker to try to install Jeffrey Berman, an ally. It also, well before that, he leaned on Corey Lewandowski to try to get rid of Jeff Sessions. And he leaned on Don McGahn, the White House lawyer, to try to get rid of Robert Mueller. So there is a pattern here.
No, I think that's true. And I think one of the real questions this raises is not just about the investigation. Let's go down the road and judge that Mueller determines that he's not going to charge the president. We're in for a fight. The most significant nomination the president's made is the new Attorney General, Barr. Barr is going to have to make the decision about how much of that information Mueller has about all these interferences, how much of that goes to the Congress. Because I suspect that Congress is going to be the one, and maybe not Mueller, in the Department of Justice, who decides what's going to happen with all the information about interference. So watch for a fight. And the fight will be when the final report is done that includes, I guarantee you, more than the New York Times has on White House interference. Does Barr say this information, A, should go to the public, where we get to decide, and B, should go to the Congress? I think there's going to be a fight.
I know there's going to be a fight because Bill Barr is the last line of defense. He's gone through everybody. He has gone through the whole cabinet. He's gone through the entire DOJ. He's gone through the entire FBI. He has purged, which is what autocrats do, every disloyal person in his view. People who are loyal and have fidelity to the rule of law and not to him are all gone. And the ones who dared to cooperate are now rats. Their whole effing families have to be investigated. Go back to Hillary, bring her up as a foil. Keep saying that because Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, had an extramarital affair, which, okay, it's wrong. But does that mean that they did crummy jobs? Does that mean that the stuff that they found out to be true is somehow untrue? No, I mean, it's just trash everybody. Just put a seed of doubt about each and every person. Mueller is conflicted, and Barr is, I don't know what they'll do to Barr. See, Barr, let me just tell you this, is in a no-win situation, okay? And I don't know what Barr is thinking. I don't know. If he's sitting there going, you know what, I was Attorney General, I know how it works, let me just do it again. I had a meeting with my kids, and they're all lawyers. And, I said to my kids, I could take this, I could not take this. I mean, if I take it, I can't violate the law, right? I'm not going to die in jail for this man. So I'm going to, if I don't issue the report after all this time and all this talk and all these indictments and all of these guilty pleas and all of these charging documents, if I don't let the report out, I'm going to be inundated with subpoenas, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to that, and I'm going to die in jail, okay, at the end, if I cover it up. So I'll just take the job, and you know what? I'll help you kids. I'll get you plum jobs, and that's what I'll use it for. And then when the president's pissed off at me, like he was with Jeff Sessions, like he is at Whitaker, like he is at Mueller, like he is at, Paul Ryan and all the other people that wouldn't, protect it, then, I'll just resign, but you'll have these plum jobs. What do you think? And the family said, you know what, Dad? It's a great idea. I don't know if that's who he is, or if he's a man who's 65 years old and looked back at his life and said, I should have done more, and is a dyed-in-the-wool ideologue and has pledged, to drink the Kool-Aid for this man. I have no idea. We're about to find out. I will tell you there was some interesting tweets from the right wing as soon as Barr was sworn in, saying, now that Bill Barr is the Attorney General, Mueller will go away. You will see Mueller go away. And then all of a sudden today, Mueller will be done early next week. What? Well, what happens to the report? And we're all about to find out. And if the report is just a summary and it's not, to our liking, those of us who are granularly informed about these cases, there will be a fight, a big one. And thank God we have a majority in the House of Representatives, because without it, we would just have to sit there and take it. But we don't. We can issue subpoenas. We can call witnesses. We can have Barr come in and explain his thought process. And we will get to the bottom of it. Now, what we've been able to demonstrate here today is that the president broke the law. The president is not entitled to fire anybody with criminal intent. The president is not allowed to lie to anybody with criminal intent. The president cannot execute any of his powers, none of them, not even executive privilege, with criminal intent. The president has shown that he is intending to be a criminal. Bye, Stinking Podcast.